Okay, so I'll get to character creation a little bit later. There's some mention of that here, but I'm going to start with task resolution. So, task resolution part one, you are rolling two dice plus either a bonus or a penalty versus a target number. The dice rolled will depend on one of your four attributes. Um, D6 is the lowest, D8 is, I guess, about average for heroes. D10 is the highest you can start with as a PC, and D12 is the max overall. This is very simple, it's very direct. Anybody who plays D&D will recognize it. It is basically roll dice, add the numbers, see if you beat the target number. It's basically what you do with D20, just you're using two dice of varying sizes rather than one. You're still going to be running either from a low number of 2 to a high number of either 12, of ranging from 12 to 24, depending on the size of the dice you're using. So it is going to be a bell curve because that's what happens when you include two dice, which will make the results bending in the center. It does use some difficulty things ranging from difficulties of 7 to 16, with 16 being the more difficult stuff. They do say never subvert the outcome, which means that you are not going to turn a success into a failure. You're also not going to turn a failure into a success. There is a caveat to this, as you can see. The caveat is that this is a fortune in the middle system. By that I mean that a check involves a die roll, but the die roll is not the end of the check. The player has the option to spend Fabula points to adjust the way things go after the roll. This is the way Fate works. There's a couple other systems that do it this way. If you've only ever played like D&D, then you're used to Fate at the end, which is where you say what you're going to do, you pile up your modifiers, and then you roll the die, and the die is the final arbiter. In this case, the die basically sets up how much it's going to cost you to succeed. In addition to spending Fabula points, you also have the option to succeed with cost, where even though you rolled a fail on the die, you will still succeed at what you were trying to do, but that will come with something happening that makes a higher complication. I do really love success with cost. It is one of my favorite parts about Fate, and it is kind of my default when I run Monster of the Week and somebody rolls a miss. Is I tend these days to default towards success with cost in that system, because I find it more interesting that, for instance, somebody trying to use their supernatural strength to open an elevator door, and then they roll a miss. So what happens is they punch through the door and tear up their arm, but they do open up the elevator for themselves and their friends. It's just they take damage doing it. I much prefer that because it keeps things moving forward. Sometimes you are just going to want to have them fail. Like, oh, well, you didn't catch the bad guy. They're gone. Oh, well. Let's see. Or you didn't save the person. They hit the ground and died. That kind of thing. Don't ask for rolls if failure will kill progress. I'll get more into that about when you ask for things. Relevant success, no follow-up checks. This is a bad habit of mine where player will say, I want to do X, and I'll ask them to do one thing and say, okay, that has opened up, made it easier to do the other. So I'll ask for like a check after a check in other systems. This is asking you not to do that. And what you're supposed to do is, or rather, it's not saying don't do that. What it is saying is don't spring it on the players. They would ask you to use a clock if you wanted to be complex and use more than one roll. If you ask for a roll just flat out and they succeed at the roll, then they succeed at the roll. Flat. No do-overs. What that means is you can't immediately say, I want to try again, and roll the same skill. You failed. the results of that failure stand, whether they are a success with cost or whatever other situation occurred. Um, the caveat is that unless you drastically change the situation, like if you snap off a lock in a chest so that you can't get it open, but later you get hold of a welding torch, then you've drastically changed the situation. You get another chance to open the chest. Okay, and part 2. When to check. So, PCs are heroes. In a lot of cases, they're just going to succeed at things. These are the titles for the actual full page sidebar they have on when you're supposed to do a check. One of those is sometimes you should simply succeed. Don't ask them to roll a die to find the tavern. Maybe they'll have to, if there are some, if getting to the tavern without being seen by bandits is an example that they have here, would require a roll, but finding the tavern, they'll just do it. Context and circumstances. They don't need a roll to swim in a calm lake. They do need a roll to swim in a flooding river. That kind of thing. Relevant background. Some cases, a character based off their traits or identities or origins will just be able to do things. An aristocrat is going to be able to get you an invitation to the ball, unless they're wanted for some reason. A soldier will just know some things about military things. You don't have to ask them for a roll for it. You can just give them that information based off what their traits are. Impossible actions. Some actions simply cannot succeed. The example they give is you cannot jump from Earth to the moon. Now, if the players want to get to the moon, you can present them options for how to do that. Maybe set up a transportation spell, maybe build a rocket. And that would become a situation where they have to set up to do those things, either a ritual or a project. And that is a long-term situation. In terms of the RPGs, you would call it kind of like, oh, now we have to do the fetch quest. The difference is here is, okay, you want to do X. You're going to need to be able to do a ritual, and that ritual is very expensive, so you might want to set things up to make it cheaper so that it comes within what you're able to succeed at. And that avoids one of the main problems that fetch quests have, in that fetch quests are usually put on the player and they are not the player's idea. With this case, the player has suggested an impossible action. You've told them, well, you can set it up by trying to do a ritual spell or build a rocket, and now the player has objectives. They have set up their own fetch quest. It works so much better. It's an advantage the TTRPGs have over the computer games. Relevant failure. If failing to check doesn't change anything, don't ask for the roll. I mean, if the characters are not under pressure and they can just take their time and go through it easy, don't ask for the roll. You want to ask for the roll if they're under pressure, if there's a time crunch, if failing will affect the story, basically. Stick to the rules. If the rules ask for a check, or if they don't ask for a check, there's probably a good reason. So unless you're in a very odd situation, you probably want to stick to what the rules say. There are going to be cases where rules are wrong, because rules are made for a set of preconceived situations, and it is entirely possible, though highly unlikely, that you will run across one that they do not anticipate. But if you're in one of the specific situations where the game asks for a roll, a check, or you're in one of those situations where the game specifically says don't check, follow those rules, because it's probably easier in the long run. Okay, so fumble. A fumble happens when you get a failed roll. Oh, it's when both dice rolls show a 1. Okay, so it's a double 1. I thought it was at least one die had to be a 1, but no, it's a double 1. So that should be very rare. But yes, a double 1, and I got my thing here wrong, but it's a double 1 is a fumble. And a critical success is when you get any doubles that are 6 or higher. So double 5 is not a critical success, but you may get, if the difficulty was 10, you did have a success, but it's not a critical success. But a double 6 is a critical success, automatic. Double 7, double 8, double 9, double 10, double 11, double 12, any of those are an automatic success. Whether you have a critical success or a fumble, this will produce what is called an opportunity. An opportunity is a extra sort of twist that can happen as a result of the roll. In the case of a fumble, the person who was the opposition or the closest relative to an opposition would decide what the opportunity happens is, and they'll probably take one that either benefits them or causes problems for whoever fumbled. And a critical success, the person who rolled is choosing the opportunity. The list of opportunities is the same. Stuff like advantage, affliction, bonding, faux pas, favor, information, lost item, progress, plot twist, scan, and unmask. And that is the basics of task resolution in Fabula Ultima.